Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Faculty Lightning Lounge. My name is Bill Stanley. I'm a professor in political science on the Albuquerque campus and associate provost for faculty success. One of my pleasant job tasks is to host Lightning Lounge. A number of people contribute to organizing this, and I want to thank Barbara Rodriguez in academic affairs, Julia Fulgham, Kate Cunningham, and Sandy Rodriguez, all from Advance at UNM. Erin Haney, Center for Teaching and Learning, and a number of colleagues at the Office of the Vice President for Research for helping to suggest names and organize and support Lightning Lounge. Our next episode will be on the Albuquerque campus on March 8th in Ortega Hall 335. If you're interested in presenting at Lightning Lounge, please let me know my email. I'll drop my email in the chat. And for Lightning Lounge, we welcome presentations on research as well as teaching innovations and other things that showcase your work as faculty. For today's Lightning Lounge edition, we have 4 presenters from UNM branch campuses, including Kristian Simcox, who is Associate Professor of Philosophy and Religion at UNM-Gallup, Peninah Wolpo, who is Lecturer 3 in Classics and Division Chair in Fine Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, UNM-Los Alamos. Barbara Lovato, Library Director and Principal Lecturer 3 at UNM-Valencia, and Colin Nichols is the Chair of the Science Department at UNM-Taos. So I'm looking forward to all of your presentations. We'll proceed in the order that our presenters appear on the poster. Each presenter will speak for about 7 minutes, and then we'll open up for questions and comments. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, just please use the raise hand function in Zoom, or just have your camera on and wave, and I'll see you and recognize you. So first up will be Kristian Simcox for his presentation, Post-Enlightenment Thought in the Time of Ecological Crisis. Over to you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let's get started. I can see this. Okay, so the title I've given my presentation today, which is I've decided to share a snapshot of my current scholarship. The title is Post-Enlightenment Thought in the Time of Ecological Crisis, and hopefully in the next about 7 minutes, I'll unpack what this title means. Starting with the last term there, ecological crisis. My work largely takes as a given, right? So the reality of an environmental crisis is evident now in many forms and presents itself to us in many directions. Examples abound, right? So the challenge confronting us begins with seeking both new and recovering old paths through and out of the continuation of environmental degradation. So then enlightenment. Well, the term enlightenment can be used in a number of ways. For example, it can refer to a historical era spanning the late 17th century to the early 19th century in Europe, and featuring a group of loosely affiliated philosophers and scientists. But it can also refer to a worldview, a mentality, a set of values, which I think can be captured as a commitment to individual liberty and the improvement of humanity through the use of reason. And it's that second sense that largely concerns me, right? This mentality and a set of values that is the Enlightenment's legacy that is in many ways still with us today. So the question might arise here, right? What's the connection between the Enlightenment and ecological crisis? Well, here I look to the work of a contemporary Confucian thinker named Tu Weiming. So he is a prominent Confucian philosopher, but largely his work engages in what he calls civilizational dialogue between distinct cultural, religious, and philosophical perspectives. In a series of essays spanning the past 3 decades and sharing a variation on the title Beyond the Enlightenment Mentality, Tu Weiming argues for rethinking and transforming the legacy of the Enlightenment, even in the face of preserving its core values. All right, so in the core values, so Tu follows the 20th century American sociologist Talcott Parsons in identifying the ideals of progress, reason, and individualism as the core values of the Enlightenment mentality and its legacy, values that have proven both empowering and endangering. So 2 reveals ambiguities abiding within these values. That reason comes to mean, or excuse me, that progress comes to mean tolerating inequality for the sake of accomplishments in technology, market economy, and so on. That reason is expressed in faith in the salvific power of self-interest. That individualism comes to be interpreted as the unbridled affirmation of aggressive egoism. In response, he calls for the mobilization of 3 kinds of spiritual resources to meet these challenges, including the ethico-religious traditions of the modern West. And that's where currently my scholarship is focused, right? Drawing on moments in these traditions to be part of that, civilizational dialogue, to look to meet the challenges of our era. In particular, I look to a 19th century German philosopher called Friedrich Schelling. Friedrich Schelling is associated with the schools of German idealism and German romanticism. He has his feet in both camps, which is also interesting as a historical moment, thinking through the legacy of the Enlightenment. He's not very well known in the English reading world. To the extent that he is, he's kind of seen as a minor transitionary figure between the towering giants of Kant and Hegel. I'm among those who see more relevance of Schelling's work. He's a proponent of views including absolute identity, which is the view that everything exists in essential unity, but is revealed as distinct, and Naturphilosophy, or philosophy of nature, which includes the view that nature consists of one organic whole of which we are a part, right? Not fully reducible to that whole, but integrated within it, and that our actions then are, relevant for what unfolds in that organic whole. Now, those of us who study Schelling, I think tend to occupy a dark, hidden corner of the intellectual world, which is why it came as a surprise to me in September of this past year to see Schelling appear on the opinion section of the New York Times. Right, the author, Andrea Wolf, a historian, contributed this guest essay on Schelling's relevance for helping us through the climate crisis, right? So I guess he's going mainstream, right? And maybe I'm onto something, right? So that's pretty cool. Schelling's work helps or aims to transcend the dichotomies of spirit and matter, body and mind, human nature, dichotomies which had emerged in both philosophical and scientific contexts in the Enlightenment and beyond. And so he's working to show that those apparent opposites have reality, but are grounded in some more essential unity, and that we need to see that unity and recover that sense that we can bridge the dichotomies of human and nature, body and mind, and so on. So just as an example, Schelling articulates a concept of human selfhood that preserves individuality while integrating the individual irreducible within the whole, or the larger community, the world, right? So that's an example, but more generally, I think his work offers rich resources for thinking along with and beyond and thinking through the ambiguities within the values of progress, reason, and individualism as they shape our contemporary self-understanding. So I'll conclude with just a comment on what I mean then by post-Enlightenment thought. I don't mean abandoning the values of the Enlightenment and its legacy, right? These are very important and powerful. I do mean drawing on resources to rethink them in ways that can, again, reshape our understanding of ourselves and our relationship to the world that I hope can, contribute to guiding us toward paths through and out of the current ecological crisis. Thank you, and I'll stop sharing.
Great, thank you very much. Open to questions. Gwyneth Dolan, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm here with COM 1140 Intro to Media Writing, and we are reporting on your talks today. About 20 of us young journalists in here. I'm not included in that. And so my question for you, Professor Simcox, is if you are successful in persuading people to think this way, how will the world be different?
Thanks. That's I mean, that points to the perhaps overly ambitious nature of my research. I mean, so the thought here is, again, and as a philosopher, I think, okay, well, how can I apply my tools, right, to these kinds of issues, right? I think that we need to call upon the work of many different, areas, science, the arts, religion, and so on, to engage in this dialogue, but also hopefully become public intellectuals about this, right? And by rethinking of these values, not abandoning them, but maybe counterbalancing them, individuality, but with a sense of community to which we belong, right? And therefore a sense of how my behavior, right, and what I do affects a larger community, that can reshape what we do, right? So I mean, I'm a believer that reshaping our ideas, our beliefs and values will inform different behaviors, right? And that this would say challenge us, along with statistics and so on, to change behaviors, so to reduce our impacts on the environment. I hope that addresses your question.
It does. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Peninah Wolpo had a question in the chat. Do you want to go ahead and
Sure, I'll take
ask
that.
it directly? Thanks.
Sure. I was just wondering what role he might see altruism playing in the process, or what role you might see altruism in the process of rethinking.
I think, Peninah, thank you. That's a great question. Schelling's not known as a great moral thinker, but I do think, his ideas provide some groundwork for this. He's one of these guys who comes to see that, yes, we do, if we act truly freely, then we're acting in accordance with ideals that transcend self-interest. So he does have that, right? Which would, I think, speak to altruism, right? That a genuine, human freedom would come to be expressed. I don't know if he's quite right about that. But I am interested in that, right? That altruism would be the ability to see not just, so yes, I'm an individual and I should be protected by individual rights and so on, but that in doing so, I also have an obligation to others. I can't just say, well, I can, so I should, right? And that's the way I mean, does that address your question, Peninah? Thank you. Sorry.
Carl Hitterbisher has a question. Carl, go ahead. Your mute is on.
What would you recommend as a reading?
Oh, great. Well, I guess I'd start with Andrea Wolf's brief guest editorial or guest opinion piece, but a reading from Schelling. Schelling is he's kind of a philosopher's philosopher. He's not always the most accessible, but something like The System of Transcendental Idealism from 1800, and then any, commentaries on this. There are a whole host of, in fact, another one comes to mind now. There's an anthology from 2004, 2005 called Schelling Now. And it's a collection of essays that focus on how Schelling's work might be relevant for us today. So not just interpreting Schelling in his own time, but drawing, his work to bear on our contemporary world. That's edited by Jason Worth.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carl.
Kristian, this is probably not a fully thought out question, but have you seen indications that anyone in the social sciences is paying attention to implications of Schelling's work? Because I think about how economists, for example, look at the economics of climate mitigation and other kinds of harm reduction, and it's inherently individualistic. It's sort of how much are you willing to pay to reduce air pollution in the Grand Canyon? Sort of framings.
I haven't seen any obvious indications of that. I'm going to take note, because I think that would be great to look into this to see whether he has crossed the divide into the social sciences. I think it's really worth noting that there are major contributions to be made there. I think some of my work also gets at, like, a lot of that is relevant, but we know a lot of this stuff and we're still don't seem to be sufficiently moved, right? So what else can we do to start to be moved to change our behaviors? And that, yeah, the inherent individualism of some of these cases are pitching these arguments on the, they're pitching it like where we already are, right? In sort of a very individualistic society. And it might be, we can do that, but also look to ways to rethink our individualism. Again, not abandon it, but recontextualize it. Yeah, thanks. But yeah, thank you for that question and implicit suggestion.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that presentation. Very interesting. I may undertake to read a bit of this. Sounds challenging, but very, very interesting.
Well, thank you.
So thanks very much. Next up is Peninah Wolpo, presenting on using low stakes assignment to improve workflow. Peninah, over to you.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's a real privilege to get to talk at the Lightning Lounge. I've attended a few over the years, and it's just really a great privilege to be here. Strangely enough, I'm not talking about the ancient world or Romans or Greeks, which is normally what I would be doing. But I've been working on this project for a couple of years now, as I've been, coming into contact with a lot of the professional development I'm sure all of us have. This push for best practices and low stakes assignments and trying to improve retention and success. In the course of my own transition to the online world, like many of us, I had to sort of adjust some of my practices and learn a few new tricks. Along the way, I've been collecting data from my Greek mythology classes and my Greek and Roman civilization classes to see if these things actually work and how they work. So low stakes assignments in general and other inclusive teaching practices, we're all being, these things have been proven. There's lots of studies about this, but we're generally told it's a good practice for skill acquisition, and that it helps students make productive mistakes on the way to success, to include things like low stakes assignments within your course design. And more importantly, it helps them maintain a growth mindset where they keep trying in spite of mistakes or because of mistakes even sometimes. So trying to grasp this within my own course design and trying to cope with it, it seems like a lot of extra stuff to be trying to do. But then there was this moment where I realized it's not all about students. It can also help us as faculty improve our workflow and some of the frustrations we come up against on a daily basis. And some of this has also developed over the last year in my capacity as division chair. I've been working with faculty on some of these issues. Sort of at another level. And so I wanted to talk today about how we can use these things, not just to help them, but also to help us. So of course, participation grades is probably where many of us are already using some low stakes assignments, things like discussion boards or even short answers. Just, getting people to raise their hand in class. And let me add a caveat. I use my course design in both online and in-person classes. So this is actually going into both. I don't actually change my grade breakdown for in-person or online classes. So I've collected all the data for both. So something else these low stakes assignments can help us with, though, is that sometimes we run into a frustration where our students don't have the skills we think they should. Or maybe they're just missing this one basic thing and we're like, oh, how could they not have that already? Pop in a low stakes assignment for it. Just, a 2-question quiz to maybe help them realize they don't have the skill and go seek it out, or even to help them build the skill, a simple writing technique presentation. So using these sort of credit, no credit assignments, just a quick pop in, like answer this one question. Those can actually help our students get these basic skills we think they should have. Maybe we're not sure if they do, and we just want to see if they have it before we kind of throw them into the deep end of a larger assignment. Something else also I've noticed is that just adding a few lower stakes assignments into my courses has definitely ensured RASI, that reasonable expectation for interaction. But also it's improved the quality of my interactions with my students. They talk to me more and they're more willing to ask super interesting questions and make mistakes out loud in front of other students. So improving the interaction overall, having these low stakes assignments where they don't think it's going to kill their whole grade to maybe fail at something, it actually really helps them and it helps us to improve that interaction and kind of ease some of the tension of that power dynamic. Finally, there's also the assessment expectation that we often have to fulfill. These kinds of assignments are very easy to design for very specific purposes. So if you needed to, say, design an assessment for information and digital literacy, I usually have that skill kind of within a larger research assignment or something, and that's hard to show, that's hard to quantify for the purpose of assessment. So what you could do is actually pull that little piece out as sort of pre-work for the assignment and have it be a smaller, low-stake assignment where the student gets to practice the skill and you get to give feedback along the way, and then you can submit that for assessment. So these smaller assignments can really just help develop our course design, but also make our job actually a little easier as faculty, coming at it from the selfish faculty side. So I've been collecting data from my courses since 2019, when I first kind of attended my first New Mexico Here conference and found out about best practices, and we all had to make the switch to online very soon after that. So I've been collecting data since 2019. As I collected my data, I removed all the ghosts, like those students who just never did anything or attended class. So I'm not counting those in my raw numbers. I'm just taking the number of students enrolled, taking those ghosts out, and then tracking from there. I chose to use my first quiz as my benchmark for whether students kept trying after that. It's important to me. If students drop after that first quiz, that means that they've just given up because maybe they didn't like the grade they got on the quiz, or maybe they didn't feel I was transparent enough about my expectations, or something like that. So I've chosen my first graded quiz as a benchmark. And then what I've done is I've tracked retention and the success of the students as I've adjusted my course design and assignments over time. And this is a much shortened version of something I'm presenting next week at the HERE conference, actually. So since 2019 up until just last semester, I've actually gone from 7 grading opportunities to 14. And that might seem really shocking because I've added a lot more work for my students, and we think, oh, students hate it when you add too much work. They've thrived and they have absolutely benefited, and my retention has gotten a lot better. So just to point out, I've added in to track my participation grade. I've done things like including like a practice identification before I give them the identification in the quizzes as the format. I've added some short answer responses along the way where I just ask them a simple question like, so what do you think of Greek civilization? What does that word mean now? And they give me a one answer, and maybe it's easy enough to write back. It doesn't take actually that much time to grade these sorts of things. It doesn't have to be a huge assignment to be something really formative and valuable for them. So I just want to show you some of the data tracking. So I have here the, when I started just introducing rubrics, that's the black arrow. And then when I actually started introducing more sort of low stakes assignments is that red arrow. So you can see what's going on. The number of students dropping my courses is down to sometimes like mostly none, but sometimes 1. And that's not the ghosts, but the ones that actually like do something and turn work in and then drop. It's really, it's gotten to be very low. So my retention has actually become very high. At the same time, my students' performance on the first quiz has also drastically improved. As the number of assignments has improved, their average performance has improved, and my experience grading and dealing with their work has also improved. I find that I can have much higher expectations of them as I make my expectations clear. I can hold them more accountable. And with these smaller assignments where they get this chance to practice along the way, they are more able to benefit from my instructions and my pointers, my comments. They actually read my comments. And they've improved their work along the way, and they feel more able to succeed in the class. So I know I'm doing this for humanities courses, but many of these things could be applicable across fields. Low stakes assignments could be something as simple as a long word problem where you give some really, detailed feedback on how they handled it, something like that. So I don't think that this needs to be specific to humanities. That's what I wanted to talk about today, is just using these low stakes assignments to sort of develop your course design, add more opportunities for students to do work for you, because they actually do see them as opportunities to kind of show off. And the more you encourage that, I think the more willing they're going to be to work for you. And I was actually surprised when I put these numbers together that they didn't actually just start like fleeing my classes as I had something due every week. I have something due every week. And they've responded very well. So I was surprised. The numbers don't lie. Low stakes assignments really do improve retention and success. For my workflow purposes, back to that selfish point as faculty, here's what I got. I have very few grade disputes, very few, like practically none, maybe one a semester. I have way more student interaction as I have this mandatory meeting, and after that, they've been to my office once. It's almost like they tapped the keg and now they're willing to come back. I have better performance on my assignments. I have much higher sort of accountability in my students' work, and I have more improvement on their writing and skills and work quality over time because I'm letting them do those smaller practices along the way. My grading is also not as cumbersome as you would think. I spend about an hour a week grading, but it's not you know what I mean? It's not horrible grading. It's just like, oh, great. Thank you for sharing this thing with me. A lot of it is just simple, small interactions like that and checking stuff in. So nothing too torturous in terms of the grading. And of course, my RASI is like off the charts. So yeah, that's my presentation, this shortened version on low stakes assignments to improve your course design and your workflow. I hope you've enjoyed. I welcome questions.
Peninah, why don't you stop share so we can see the cast of characters? Looks like there was a Gwyneth Dolan has a question, and then there was one in the chat from Julia. So Gwyneth, go ahead.
Actually, we have a student question. Go ahead,
Oh,
Josh.
great.
Hi there, Josh Visenkowski, COM 1140 student. I was just curious to know if you believe that assigning more low stakes tasks might help develop or foster a child's healthier understanding of the concepts of failure or just being wrong in general.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And it sounds so weird to say out loud, but so many of our students don't know how to fail successfully. They see a failure as just, that's it, that's the end. Or like, you know, someone who picks up a guitar and their G chord sounds horrible, like, well, I'm never going to play guitar. It's that kind of, it's really easy to put it down if you don't know how to fail successfully. And I think that's absolutely like the core of growth mindset, is being able to see your mistakes as a developmental step rather than just like the end of the world.
Great, thanks.
I don't remember who was next. I'm so sorry.
Aaron is up, and yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Hi, well, this is like one of those comments that's pretending to be a question, or I should say it's praise pretending to be a question. So I just want to say thank you. This is such good work. It's such good data. And I was going to ask if you were going to, publicize this. So I'm really glad that you're presenting it because this is the scholarship of teaching and learning. And I also, so your presentation was so clear and so thorough. The one credit that you could give yourself in this project even more is to point out that your data is collected over 2020, right?
Oh,
There is that.
I was tempted not to include spring
so
2020.
Because retention, to say that a small sort of simple-ish, but thought out intervention helps student retention, engagement, and your own well-being as an instructor, and it took place over this very difficult time. I think that's just really compelling and powerful information. So thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation.
No, thank you for that. And I wasn't sure if I should actually include those semesters. So I'm glad I did. Thank you.
Great, good comment, question. Lauren Perry-Romo, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. This is amazing. My question, my background is in English and I teach in English. And so from a humanities perspective still, as you've gone on with this, with these smaller assignments, does it help you get a handle on writing skills or like more basic skills that they might need help with up front, and then you're allowed to like, and so this is like a question, but also I'm thinking like that it seems so useful for imparting like how to properly format things or smaller skills that sometimes in like a classics class they might not have had that or not have had it yet or not have, you have that interaction. And then the second part of that question just being, did you feel or experience like an uptick in how fast you were able to grade your students because you knew them better, because you had more like points of contact over the semester?
So the first thing I actually tried doing was just developing a really clear rubric that went along with the instructions for the identification paragraph. So the first thing I do with them is this one focus paragraph on one topic. Here's how to do it. Here's the rubric I use. Just adding that made my grading of the IDs so much easier because I had a point system for each sentence and they knew exactly what to do. And that's what I meant by it. It allowed me to really be strict with them in terms of accountability. They knew exactly what I wanted. They had the rubric from the beginning and they got to do a practice, which was just credit, no credit, before they actually had to do it on the quiz. And I noticed immediately an improvement in their writing skills also because of the way the identification is made. It's not, I mean, we call it the identification. It's really just a really good paragraph format, right? And so I try to build in those basic writing skills along the way. And I've noticed that once they start trying it and they know that they can try it kind of for free, then they're willing to keep trying. And so, yeah, it helped a lot. I've also added a couple of smaller assignments on writing skills. I have a small workshop we do just for 10 minutes on one class on taking good notes. And then the week after that, I have them compare notes with each other. So I try to build these skills in, and I've noticed that it improves their writing like immensely, like very quickly. And it does make the grading easier also to have those rubrics because I just plug it in. Did they do this score? And it allows me to be a little less, I actually try not to connect the work with the student's name because we do form favorites. That's just the truth. And I don't want to just focus on the A students. I actually want to focus on the ones that need the help the most because I know the A students are going to be okay. So it actually helps me not do that as much as I possibly can.
Great. Thank you. So we've got 3 more people with their hands up and we're starting to run slightly over time. So Gwyneth Dolan, one more from your group, and then Kristian, and then Max Garrett.
Thank you for taking us because it is
Thanks for all the questions. This is exciting.
Yeah, it really is.
Oh, hello. I was wondering how this would translate to STEM courses.
Strangely enough, I also do coaching for things like the GRE and the SAT, which does involve some science and math work. And I think this absolutely translates directly. If you, instead of say having a midterm and a final in a STEM course, have 3 or 4 midpoint quizzes along the way, just doing that will help your students feel like they can succeed a little better. If one, if they bomb one, they can try out the next one. That just doing some small adjustments like that. But also when we're doing stuff like long problems and such, learning those organizational skills for keeping track of your work or for something like a proof or something, why not have that be a practice low stakes assignment? Just do one and see how you do and get a bunch of red ink back. That way, when you do one on the big quiz or whatever, you know what you're doing, what you can fix. So absolutely, I think low stakes assignments, they're so easy to design and they can be anything. They can be one question. They could be a series of questions. They could be, write a short thing. They can be anything you want. So absolutely.
Great. Thanks to somebody who bombed a calculus exam at one point. I sympathize with that. Okay,
as someone
Kristian.
who quit the hard sciences because of that.
So Kristian, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Peninah. That's really great and great stuff to think about. A number of questions. One that comes to mind, and I guess maybe this is an issue for me, is balancing the low stakes, no credit, no credit, and the aim of making productive mistakes, right? And I guess sometimes I worry about reinforcing error, right? So when it's credit, no credit, I wonder if this is an issue for you ever, if you have strategies for ensuring that that the student doesn't see I got credit for it, and so good, I've got it, and instead building from there.
Totally. Actually, I took to adding a second assignment a week later, where I have them reflect on my comments from the practice ID, where they have to go back over it, and maybe even if they want to, they can rewrite it to fix the mistakes, or they can just say, you know, they can just look at my comments and say what they'll do differently next time. So yeah, I think reflection exercises also can be low stakes assignments, and you can actually have them sort of staggered out so that you have, like, you know, rough draft this thing, look at my comments, write up my comments.
Great,
Make them read
thanks.
them.
Last question, and snappy question, snappy answer, please, for time. Thanks. Max Gehring, go ahead.
Hi there. So I had one question. So you talked about all this improvement and I like it. But I wanted to know about your relationship with your students. Do you feel like this type of learning strengthens or like weakens it? What have you noticed?
I don't want to seem braggy, but my Greek myth students come back for my Greek Civ and my Roman Civ class, even though I do not have very many classics majors at Los Alamos. They sometimes try to follow me to the world religions class. I even have students come from my first year experience class into the Greek myth, just like, even though they don't really care about Greek anything, but they just, yeah. So they really do, they see that they're building these skills. And I do talk to them over time, especially since I became division chair. I actually see these students more often because of like other things. And they tell me they use some of these skills in other classes. It does help their study skills in other places. And so, yeah, they respond very well to this. And again, I was kind of surprised because I thought adding more work would kind of make me like that professor. Because I already signed a ton of reading. And but no, they thrive and they come back for more.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's really great to know. Thanks for the question, and thanks for your answers.
Thank you very much.
Clearly,
It was
clearly, your
very-
presentation, you know, sparked a lot of oh yeah kind of response from this audience. So thanks very much. Next up is Barbara Lovato, presenting on UX in academic libraries, what it means for teaching librarians. Barbara, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me see about sharing my screen. I got the wrong screen?
Yeah, it's good. Oh, it looks good from here.
Okay, cool. All right. So thank you very much for having me here today. Like they mentioned, my name is Barbara Lovato. I'm the library director and a principal lecturer 3 here at the Valencia campus at UNM. And so I am no way an expert in the field of user experience as it pertains to today. But it has been an interest, user satisfaction, user experience, kind of customer service is kind of what we do in libraries. And so it's not really a new thing for us, but the focus has kind of shifted. So I've worked in academic libraries since 1997, and I've been in faculty status since for 14 years since I've been here at UNM. The interesting thing is that regardless of our status, faculty, staff, that all of our work has been really about instruction and about customer service. The thing that has changed really is the nature of what people come into the library for. And so there was kind of a school of thought there for a while that probably about 20 years ago, that, you know, everything's available online. You know, we're not going to need warehouses of books anymore. And so libraries and librarians were going to go the way of the dinosaur. When I was in library school, I contributed an essay to a book called Expectations of Libraries in the Librarians in the 21st Century. So, and that was published in 2003. So as you can see, 20 years ago, they were really talking about what are the expectations of librarians? What are they going to do? I think it's important for us to kind of go back and look at what our roles really are, because I think regardless of our status, I think a lot of people don't really know what librarians do, to be honest. And so in 2014, the Association of College and Research Libraries, which is a division of the American Library Association, actually created a task force to revise the standards for proficiencies for instruction librarians and coordinators. That's a mouthful. But I think it was important for them to do that because it really, these standards didn't really reflect what librarians were doing in academic libraries. And so they came up with something called the roles and strengths of teaching librarians, and that was approved in 2017. So this should look familiar to some of you, maybe all of you, just as faculty and being in an academic environment. So these rules, and I don't have time to go over all of them, but and I have all of the words here. So if anybody would like my slides, I can totally share that with you, because all of the descriptions of what this means as a teaching librarian, I've included in this presentation. But I'm not going to go over them. I'm just going to talk about advocate, coordinator, instructional designer. We've all had to kind of become instructional designers, leaders. So especially in a small library, like I've had experience in working in, I have to kind of do all of these things because there's not very many of us. And so lifelong learner, we have the expectation that all of us are going to be lifelong learners, librarians, teaching librarians especially, teachers, and of course teaching partners. So we do like to collaborate with other faculty to look at their goals, to provide just in time information. If you have an assignment, we would like to touch your students at that point, not just in case they're going to need this stuff later on. So I'm just going to leave that at that. And if you would like my slides, or maybe we can share them, then you're welcome to look at that. So now that I've talked about the roles of teaching librarians, what exactly is user experience? And so, as I mentioned before, user satisfaction is kind of the buzzword, customer service. User experience, UX, kind of comes from the human computer, human machine interface kind of world. And it's transitioned over into librarianship practices, kind of in terms of best practices for user satisfaction, and focusing kind of on empathy. So trying to make library services and products useful, usable, desirable. And so, so user satisfaction, as I mentioned, is something that I've been interested in for a long time. My dissertation actually looked at user satisfaction and use of a community college library. And so that was kind of interesting because there was a very small correlation about satisfaction and actual use of the library. So to me, that meant they were using the library for other reasons. And so that tells me that we need to look at user experience more. We need to find out the reasons that they're coming to use the library. User design also considers spaces, services, and processes from the end user's point of view. Regarding library spaces, I'm going to be presenting on the topic of library spaces in a conference in Virginia in March. And so there's considerations when you deal with stuff like, do we need quiet spaces? Do we need interactive spaces? What sort of things do we want to provide to our users? And so essentially in the area of academic libraries, UX kind of is trying to transform in the user's eyes the notion that libraries are not just warehouses of books, and librarians aren't just the caretakers of the books. They're places where I can just go hang out, maybe have access to equipment and expertise that I don't have anywhere else. And so, but it's important for us to know about what they already know and what they need without actually having to guess. And so there's the constant need to gather data. And so you gather data that way, just like you would for anything else. You know, we can do ethnographic, so we can actually observe, you know, qualitative, quantitative. It's all about that whole process. Just showed you the cover of my dissertation, very, very boring to read the title, but there it is. And then my research question and my research hypotheses, and then of course, a little bit about my findings. So this is definitely something that I'd like to continue doing research on. I would use a different instrument. I would have more access to my survey respondents in the future, but it's almost like a day-to-day process. We're always looking at ways, what our users need and how we're going to assist them better. This is the conference I'm going to be at next month. And so what about user experience in teaching librarians? And so I think as I've mentioned a few times, every interaction in the library that we have, whether it's at the virtual reference desk, the physical reference desk, on the phone, text a librarian, if we've got 4 credit classes or one-shot sessions collaborating with faculty, it's all a teaching opportunity for us. And we're constantly looking for ways to make that experience the best that could possibly be for the students, hopefully for the faculty, whoever we're interacting with. So within the realm of UX, they're looking more at empathetic ways of looking at designing user experience. So they're looking at the user's internal state. They're looking at past experiences, obviously their goals and needs at the moment. And then whatever their external context is. So they've got a lot of stuff going on in their lives. You know, we get those kids in the classroom all the time. So we have to be empathetic. We have to look at what their perspectives are. We have to look at what their perceptions are. So what do they think about it? How did they perceive that service? Was it good? Was it fast? Did they get what they needed? Are they happy about what they got? And so, are they gonna come back? Or are they just gonna try to Google it and find their way through? So that's really quick and dirty in a nutshell about user experience in academic libraries. It's kind of what we've always been doing. We're looking at it a little bit differently nowadays, but we're always trying to adapt to the changing needs of our users and to be honest, to kind of continue to justify our existence. You know, for the longest time, we didn't need libraries because everything was available online, and we didn't need librarians because, you know, we just didn't need them. So we've changed our goals, we've changed our roles, and we're looking at providing the best service that we can for our students and our users for sure. So there's a whole bunch of references there. And there is my contact information. So I've had several people reach out to me to talk about this topic, and I'm very, very happy to talk about it and maybe collaborate on some future research in this area. I think user experience is something that you probably need to incorporate in a lot of our work, regardless of what we're teaching or how we're interacting with students. So, and that's all I had. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Good. Let's see if there are questions or comments. Getting some applause. There we go. If there were, I'll go ahead and ask one, which is if there were one thing that you as a librarian would do in your library or ask your staff to do to enhance UX for students in particular, what would that be?
I think my biggest challenge right now is actually a staff shortage. So being able to have people there, I like if people come in or if they need help, for them to have instant response. If they walk into the library, they see a face and they know that they've got help. So I think that's kind of everywhere you go, and kind of the customer service world is we're kind of short staffed and we're trying to make do. So if I could wish something, I would wish for a little bit more help. But everything else is great. I've got great people working for me with a lot of experience, and so I think things are good.
Great, thanks. Laura.
So Barbara, you were talking about physical space, and I love the idea of keeping books in the physical space because they're still very important. But what is an idea that you might have to utilize some of that physical space in a different way to improve the experience?
So like I mentioned before, thanks Laura for that question. So like I mentioned before, we would like to be able to provide something that students or users can't get anywhere else. And so a lot of libraries have created maker spaces where people can come in and use a 3D printer or use something that they can't use anywhere else. That's just way too expensive. And then there's an idea of creating like a digital archives. I can't remember what it's called, but we actually looked into it. And so it's basically transforming things into the digital realm. So if you've got slides, if you've got old film or whatever, and having people come to have a place to do things like that. So certainly I would love to keep all the books, but if we could carve out little spaces where people would say, oh yeah, the Valencia library has, I can turn my VHS into DVD, or I can turn my slides into whatever, that would be what I would go for.
Great, thanks. Mark Emmons. I think yours will have to be the last question on this.
All right, I'll let Peninah go then. No, sure. I'm sure.
She's waving herself off. So go ahead.
Talked enough. You.
Go ahead, Mark.
All right, I was just going to thank Barbara for her presentation and then representing libraries today. And I was going to also just say, we in the main campus would love to have a user experience librarian dedicated to that, because that kind of work makes a huge difference. So I just wanted to concur with what you were saying, and I'm sure Peninah had a more relevant question other than just thanking you.
Thank you.
Peninah, if your question is great, go ahead.
I did have a question.
Yeah.
Barbara, I'm so glad you said this thing about makerspace, because that's what I was thinking when you were talking. I was like, oh, that sounds kind of like makerspace, but I know that one of their challenges is actually, I mean, almost like security issues. When people aren't like qualified to use the machine or something like that. How do you see that? I mean, is that going to be a barrier to improving this like user experience, right? And trying to make it sort of open and welcoming,
right? How
are you going to cope with that challenge?
So we do have good partnerships. We're a small campus, and so we've got pretty good relationships with the faculty that are kind of in those areas. And so I don't have any doubt that if we would like to have a training or have someone come and provide expertise, so say there's a 3D printing class and we end up having a 3D printer in the library, that we could get that faculty to come in and train us and do stuff like that. Obviously, like I mentioned before, we're covering 2 locations with 3 people. So, that's already challenging, but we'd like to expand and all do all that with our services. So I don't think it would be too much of a challenge, because the people at my campus are fantastic. And so I'm sure I'd get the support that I needed. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Good question, and thanks for the presentation, Barbara. Very interesting work, and thanks for the work that you do. Next up is Colin Nichols, presenting STEM Ready, an NSF project to shift skills and mindset of developmental math students. Colin, over to you.
Thank you. Let me share. Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here talking to you. And I would have to say that one of my first goals in this talk is to try and persuade some of my skeptical colleagues at Taos that I can actually start talking and shut up 7 minutes later. So we'll see if I can actually achieve that. That's only a secondary goal. My primary goal is, in fact, as was stated, to talk to you about the work that we're doing on trying to develop the work for our students that will help them succeed in STEM and particularly math. So let's begin with background on UNM Taos. We're an open access branch campus, of course. This was a surprise to many UNM faculties that I've spoken to, but branch campuses take anybody that walks in through the door. So no SAT, no ACT requirements. That means that we frequently get students that are underprepared for college, going back to very early grade level skill deficits. And we're, of course, also an HSI serving our rural communities up here in the Taos County region, around 60% Hispanic and around 6 to 8% native students. Going on a little more about the students. They've all come through K-12 math courses at some point, and for whatever reason, it didn't stick. What we see is typically the deficiencies in skills are in the grades 6 to 10 content. So they're coming to college not being able to do things like handle fractions and signed integers. And I'm sure that the math instructors here are all saying, yep, that's where we get in our developmental classes, because it's a fairly common experience. I taught for 10 years in Taos High School, exactly those students, and we had some success there using a constructivist approach. The problem with the existing materials, some of which are developed by NSF, are that they're highly grade focused. So that means, I remember with great sadness, teaching a remedial math class at Taos High School and having an 11th grader come to me, and we were working on fractions and saying, "Mister, why are we doing this baby math?" It sort of broke my heart. The issue is that it's not that the math is baby, it's that the presentation is baby, the context that they set it in. So we are looking to change that. The issues that we're dealing with, as I've said, the instructors typically find many students struggling in fairly fundamental arithmetic content, fractions, signed integer, proportionalities are later, etc. But those topics are foundational for later advanced content. So we've got to lay those foundations before they can students can even advance. The constructivist approach is very helpful, and I've had success with it. It builds conceptual understanding and mathematical habits of mind, so that people are learning not just content skills, but also procedural skills and strategies of how to handle material. The trouble is that constructivist approaches are student-paced, and they tend to be slow because you've got to go at the student's pace, not the pace that gets you through 7 chapters in a semester. And here's the big kicker. Students come into those classes, they're typically 18 to 22. Some of them are even older. Our median student at UNM Taos for a while was a 34-year-old single mother. So we frequently get people coming back into education after workplace, and they've labeled themselves as bad at math. I will not be able to succeed. And just as Peninah mentioned in her presentation, growth mindset is one of the things that we're trying to push. The result of that is we lose STEM students before they even get to any STEM classes. They think they can't do it, therefore they're not even going to consider life as a biologist in the forestry or a pharmacist or whatever else is of interest to them, because they, quote, are bad at math. So the goals for the program are, first of all, to ensure the students learn key foundations, the concepts and the skills. That way they can be successful citizens in whatever field they end up with, but also build their self-confidence and help them realize that they can indeed do math. So our approach, using a constructivist approach, for those of you not into educational math speak, it's experiential, it's contextual. Try to do as few as possible of what we call naked problems, solve this equation for X. You know, we don't want to do that. We do lots of group work. We do reflection. I'll come back to reflection in a moment, but it's all in an age-appropriate context. Furthermore, we've selected key topics. We called them keystones, and we selected those based on concepts and skills that we knew students had difficulty with, but also ones that led to future higher mathematical structures. For example, fractions leads you into rational numbers lead you into rational functions. I don't know how many times I've told my students, well, when you're doing these equations, well, what would you do if you were doing 1/3 minus 1/4, you know, and they know what to do. So then we do the same things with rational algebraic expressions. Signed integers, another thing that leads into things like chemical processes, analyzing Gibbs free energies in the endo and exothermic reactions, and so on and so forth. We've developed 6 keystones in this program so far. And those keystone modules include not just activities and content in content areas, but also practices and reflection, which we get students to reflect on their employability skills and their mathematical habits of mind. Interim realizations. I've already mentioned that you can't stick to a rigid calendar. You know, you've got to go through at student pace. COVID's thrown us a complete monkey wrench. It's very difficult to switch from face-to-face instruction where you can interact with the student, do immediate formative assessment, make an adaptation. That's much harder to do online. We're currently on a one-year no-cost extension, partially at least because of that. And then, as I say, we've developed these implementation keystones, which involves things like icebreakers. You can't learn unless you're familiar with the people in your learning community. And also this thing we call it personal progress portfolio. That's a metacognitive strategy, which is a high yield educational strategy. And the whole thrust is to help students realize that these courses are in fact not some cruel and unusual punishment imposed by the mandarins at UNM. They're actually preparation for their future life. So students are required to reflect on their learning a couple of times a semester, typically at the end of each unit, and also in the final. And they're looking at things like, what did I learn? What caused me to learn it this time? How's that relevant to me? What skills did I pick up beyond the content? So where are we? Generally, the content and the pedagogy has been well received. The students like it, they get engaged with it. What we found is that in some of the lower level course, the very lowest level course, it's a bit of a bulk because the students see too many words and too much cognitive demand. So we're having to re-chunk some of the very introductory ones to break them into smaller digestible pieces. So that's one of the processes we've got to do. So our next steps, we're going to edit the keystones, at least the introductory ones, so that we can chunk them more easily, and then roll them out for the next couple of semesters so we can increase our statistical numbers. We get small enrollments, so we need as many semesters as we can just to build up some statistical certainty. And did I make my 7 minutes? No, I didn't. Okay. All right, guys, you were right. I was wrong. Okay, that will stop.
Great, thanks very much for that presentation. Peninah has a question, Monica Nietzsche has a question, and then if there's time when they're done, I have one more too. So Peninah, go ahead.
I'm so pleased that you're doing assignments about metacognition. May I ask just for a little more detail about your reflective assignments, because that's something I'm trying to work on building in right now as well, and I'd be curious to hear just a little bit more about them.
Well, I'm glad you asked about that, because I've got a notion to call you and get you to come and talk to our math department about in our PD sessions, because many of the things that you said in your presentation are we're talking about internally. But to answer your specific question, I literally break it down. The first one is the first question is, what did you learn in this unit that you hadn't realized before? So there's a realization of a growth in learning. The second question is what did we do this time that helped you learn this stuff and when you didn't understand it before? And in all of these questions, I'm looking for short paragraph, 2-3 sentence responses. And then the final questions, and that flexes a little bit, things like, what skills do you think you've learned? And I've given them typically examples like alternate representations. I couldn't do this problem with algebra, so I did a graph, or I told a picture, or I did a drawing, whatever it was. Or sometimes I'll say, so with these skills and this knowledge, how's that going to help you when you become a wildlife biologist or whatever it is that you're going into? And then the one at the semester end is a summary across all, and I put all of the elements in that.
Great, thanks very much. Monica Nietzsche, go ahead.
I just have a short question. I was wondering, do you have a textbook that you use? Do you write most of your own materials? What materials do you use for this class?
We developed all of the keystones ourselves. When I say ourselves, that means the team. This is a multi-campus collaboration. So I worked with a colleague from Western New Mexico University in Silver, and I've worked with colleagues in NMSU in Las Cruces as well. But they've all been individually developed.
Is that something that others have access to, or?
Well, it's certainly our intention, and that when the project's completed, that those keystones and materials will be published in one form or another. Don't know what form yet.
Right, thank you.
If you're interested before then, I'd be happy to talk with you. Just send me an email.
Okay, will do.
So Colin, you mentioned that you with the constructivist approach, you expect some parts of it move slowly, and that kind of reflects, as I understand it, a learner's perspective rather than we have this content and we're going to feed it to you kind of perspective. How do you deal though with the tension between the pace and the kind of expectation that before someone moves on to the next math class, they've gotten a certain number of concepts under their belt? How do you deal with that tension?
Yeah, it's that's a valid point, and it's basically individual instructor chosen. My instruction will generally go for understanding, and I'm saying I frequently break up my courses into, at the end of this course, these are things that we really, really must have. These are things that I'd really like to have, and these are sort of interesting and fun, but I'll ditch them if I have to. And so I'm using, to define what I must have, I'm going back to the student learning outcomes, and I'm saying I must hit at least 85% of those student learning outcomes, because that's what I promised the state of New Mexico I would do.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, we're at our time. I want to thank all of you for being here. I especially want to thank our presenters for their fantastic presentations. This was very, very interesting work, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you all for being here, and look forward to seeing you all again another time. Thanks very much.